Hello, it's Christina from Proverbs 31 Woman. A few of you may have been wondering where I've been. Well, it's just fall is a very busy homesteading time, as many of you know, and I've been tired and busy, and then my camera was acting up and blah, 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 blah. But that is not what today's video is about. Today, I just want to sit and talk with you about a topic that I have not really heard anybody discuss, certainly not at length. And it is not designed to be a criticism of anybody, people giving advice, because I'm among them, right? Or people taking that advice. It's simply meant to be something to bring into your consciousness, to think about when you are reading or listening or watching advice about homesteading. It's important to remember that what works for one person doesn't work for everybody. And in homesteading, this is particularly true because of where you live. That might be your general region, like in the United States, East Coast versus West Coast. It could be your state, but even more so getting down into the nitty-gritty of not even just what town you live in, but what your microclimate is like on your homestead. So the weather, the conditions of the soil, how much wind you have, how much rain you naturally have, all kinds of factors come into play with almost every aspect of homesteading. And I think that's why a lot of homesteaders, when you homestead, you're gonna fail at some point. We all do. And that's okay. We learn a lot through that. We learn about our environment and our specific homestead that way. But we need to be more conscious, I think, when we're learning homesteading information, to filter that through what we know about where we live. Let me give you some specific examples. So just here in my own very rural neighborhood, I have a neighbor who has tried to free-range chickens. They have a coop they get locked up into at night, which is absolutely essential. But then they've been free-ranging, and their flock just slowly dwindles. So, you know, a lot of us love the idea of free-ranging chickens, right? Raising them as naturally as we can. They get to scratch around and be happy and eat bugs and all those wonderful things. Not to mention it, you know, makes their eggs healthier and tastier and all those things. But ultimately, we have to think about predators, right? So even in a suburban area, you're going to have some predators, but you're more likely to be able to free range. And I think too, also in farming communities. So you have areas that have been farmland for a long time. Yeah, you have predators, but not like we do. So I live on a mountaintop that is, we're in the forest, and we are on the edge of wilderness. So many, you know, hundreds of acres, if not thousands of acres, that is essentially untouched by man. They go up there to log sometimes, but that's only once every, you know, 30 to 50 years. So the wildlife is pretty unchecked around us. And so we have not only all the flying predators, eagles and hawks and so on, but we have cougar, and we have black bear, and we have bobcat, and just on down the list. Everything wants to eat those chickens. And so unfortunately, the neighbor has realized that, yeah, it sounds great to read about free-ranging chickens in that homesteading magazine, but in reality, it just doesn't work in our location. Another example is another neighbor who has just started doing large compost heaps that are uncovered. Now, I never really honestly thought much about this, but when I have read about composting, you often see systems that are just big piles. Or maybe they have big bins that are open on several sides. And so that's how he's gone about doing this. But he's discovered that even if he really buries deep into that compost pile, his food scraps, guess what? Not only is it attracting mice and rats, but it is attracting black bear. We have a lot of black bear. They're always going to go for the easy food, and they don't mind digging in that compost heap to find whatever food you've left in there. And unfortunately, once bears start eating your garbage and getting used to people, it's not only bad for the bear population, they should be afraid or at least not want to be around humans, right? But it's dangerous for the humans and their children and their livestock and their pets and so on. So it's a bad situation. So where we live, you know, if it's not, you know, something like raccoons or rats, mice, black bear trying to get into your compost pile, it's probably a dog, a domestic dog trying to get at the poop or other food stuff you have in there, or even coyotes or other wild canines. So, you know, obviously covered like compost, especially the rotating kind of bins, they aren't free, but around here that's, and they're small, which is a bummer, but it's really the only way we can go about composting unless we just decide to dig trenches and bury our compostables in them as we go, which is another way you could do things. Another example is mobile tractors. Lots of people do this for chickens. Lots of people do it for rabbits. I would particularly love to do this for rabbits because it sounds so awesome. You're getting your grass mowed and the weeds cut down, and rabbits are nibbling happily in a more naturalistic way on food. And, you know, it makes them, it's free feed, you know, you don't have to give them as many pellets, and maybe the meat tastes better, and, you know, the list can go on and on and on about why this is such a great idea. But I have two problems. One is we live on a mountaintop, so we don't have tons of flat land. And so there would always be problems with the bottom of the tractor not reaching the bottom of the soil. So then, of course, you have your livestock getting out and predators getting in. And even if you put wire at the bottom of the tractor, which doesn't really work for chickens because they really need to be able to scratch the dirt, but some people do it for rabbits, you would still have predators wanting to get to them, which is terrifying for your livestock, and I don't want my livestock to have that kind of a stressful life. You know, if I could figure out a reasonable way to have them in a mobile tractor on uneven ground every day, and then at night pick each of them up and put them into a cage without the rabbits scratching me to death and getting away and so forth, then you know, it might be a better idea. But you know, I love reading what Joel Salatin has done with his tractors and so on, and I love the concept, but just here, that's not going to work, so I have to find different ways. In gardening is another huge area where you see this, and maybe more than anything else, it kind of drives me nuts, actually. So people will tout a certain method, like you may be familiar with Ruth Stout, who had a no-dig, she called it her no-dig method. She literally did almost no digging, certainly no tilling, almost no weeding, no irrigation, and the list goes on and on and on, and it sounds fantastic, but you have to stop and think, well, why doesn't everybody do it this way? Well, it worked really well for her in her location. I think she was in Connecticut, if memory serves, but it's not going to work great in every situation. Where I live, for example, during the warm months, we don't get rain. So no irrigation isn't going to work no matter how much I mulch, for example. I'm going to have to irrigate. That's one example. Another really big example is when people are recommending seed varieties or plant varieties. If they're not talking about, okay, I'm in this gardening zone, at least, or I'm in this region, at least, that's sort of a big red flag. So, you know, I see like in homesteading forums, people say, oh, what, you know, that looks like a beautiful zucchini or whatever. What, you know, it's prolific and it's growing well and blah, 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 blah. What variety is it? And they, without asking, you know, what gardening zone are you in? Maybe that would work for me. So when you're looking for varieties of plants to grow, it's extremely important that you understand not only what your gardening zone is, but sort of just a general idea of, you know, what your microclimate is like. For example, I can grow things more easily on my mountaintop than the people who live in town do. They're down lower and it's much cooler down there. We're significantly warmer. sometimes 20 or 30 degrees warmer than they are. So something that grows well in my yard isn't going to grow well in their yard, even though, you know, it's a 20-minute drive into town, not very far at all. Even neighbors who live down at the bottom of our mountain, they probably couldn't grow a lot of things that I grow, even though it's a very short drive down to the bottom of the mountain. So all the more so if, you know, somebody's in the Midwest and another person is in you know, California or whatever, you know. So you have to understand your homestead and think about everything you learn about homesteading through that lens. Is that going to apply in your situation? What would be the problems? Maybe there are problems you can tackle, and this is a good time to talk to somebody at your local extension office, or to talk to your neighbors, or to talk to, you know, find a forum for your state, maybe your city, something like that. Your general region where you can talk about homesteading. Generally that's pretty easy to do with gardening for sure. And just kind of, you know, learn from other people's mistakes. It doesn't mean that if your neighbor has no success growing tomatoes outside of a greenhouse that you can't, because sometimes you have to ask them, well, what methods are you using? For example, my mother-in-law lives just down the street from me, basically, and she can't hardly grow tomatoes or get them ripe before the season ends. And some of it is certainly she's not on top of the mountain like we are, and she probably has a little bit more shade than we do, but she's growing them in a sunny spot. But she's not doing some of the things that I would try if I really wanted to grow tomatoes in that situation. I would try laying down red mulch, for example, or putting in wall of waters around my tomatoes. You know what I'm saying? So I guess I'm just saying we have to use our noodles, and I'm sure all of you are trying to do that anyway. I'm not trying to insult anybody here. I'm just trying to give you something to think about, especially because winter is a time where homesteaders tend to be thinking about what are my projects for next year? How can I improve things? How can I make things easier or better? So now is the time when we're reading a lot of books and coming up with plans about what we're going to do. I'm just reminding you to filter that through the lens of what is specifically true for your homestead. I hope this helps, and I hope to see you here another time. If you have any questions at all about homesteading, any aspect of it, please don't hesitate to leave a comment. I will read it and I will reply. I might even do a video about it. Thanks so much, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.